The Gwart Show is sponsored by Ellipsis Labs. Ellipsis Labs is building Atlas, the blockchain purpose-built for verifiable finance. You may know of Ellipsis Labs by their first product, Phoenix, a fully on-chain order book DEX that's done over $50 billion in unincentivized volume. This is one of the strongest teams I know in crypto. If you're interested in working for a mission-driven company, Ellipsis Labs is hiring engineers who are passionate about crypto and finance to work on Atlas. You can learn more and apply on Ellipsis Labs Twitter, @ellipsis_labs. Don't forget to check out Atlas too, @AtlasXYZ on Twitter. Welcome. Today we have a very special guest, a personal friend, Andrew Bailey. First time I've ever had a philosopher on, so that's exciting. We're going to make sure to talk about philosophy a lot, but a Bitcoin philosopher. So that's the context. Also, there's a little bit of additional context, which is that we did an in-person interview for about 2 hours live.
It was good too.
Yeah, it was. There was some quality content there, but unfortunately, I did not press the record button on the podcast. So now we're redoing this, and hopefully we'll be able to pinpoint what we thought was the good content this time. Andrew, welcome. Please introduce yourself. Talk to us about philosophy.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I'll have good memories of us on our elbows, leaning over my desk in my office into one mic. We'll see what we can do today. And thanks for having me on. I'm a Bitcoin philosopher. I got into this because I started teaching classes at the college level on money. And money is one of those places where all roads lead to Bitcoin. So eventually that started to take over my teaching and then my research. And this year, co-authored a book called Resistance Money, a philosophical case for Bitcoin, which does use philosophy, but also a bunch of empirical and other kinds of data and evidence and arguments to make a case that Bitcoin is good for the world.
Nice. Okay, before we get into discussing your book, sell me on the need for people to approach Bitcoin from a philosophical angle. What was your motivation, and why do you think this is important for Bitcoin specifically?
I did degrees in philosophy. My life is teaching philosophy. So I think philosophy is useful in many different places. Maybe it's useful to say first what philosophy is or what it can do for us more generally. Then we can apply that to Bitcoin. Philosophy is just thinking carefully. It's thinking in slow motion, as some have said, where you try to take everything into account. So in biology, you might be thinking carefully, but only take into account experimental results or things you see in the microscope. In physics, you only take in a certain kind of experimental results or things you can prove, certain kinds of theorems you can prove on the blackboard. But what if we want to know whether something is good for us or what it's doing to society or to the world, taking into account everything we know? Well, that's the task of philosophy, which is both inspiring and cool and human and nearly impossible too, because we're asking big questions and using tools that don't always fit together well and that we don't always totally understand. And that's one difference between philosophy and science. Something becomes a science when it's well understood with manageable tools. And when we don't really know what it is we're doing, but we know it's important and we care, that tends to be where philosophy reigns. So think about Bitcoin. It's one of these phenomena it's very human. Of course, it's social technology. It lies at the intersection of cryptography and computer science and economics and the study of incentives and institutions. And it serves certain values or certain purposes. An anti-authoritarian purpose, for example. Is that good? What should we think about all that? How should we put these things together? Those are broad philosophical questions and ones that I really enjoy thinking about, despite the fact that they're frustrating and you never quite totally answer them to everybody's satisfaction and get a full agreement.
Yeah, I would also just like to note you sound a lot like what I think a philosopher sounds like. So at the very least, it appears to me as though you're playing the role well. We'll have to determine. we'll dive deeper. But if I was to imagine what a philosopher sounds like, it's kind of nailing it right now.
I'm not going to say thank you there. But
No. That's endearing. That's
noted.
endearing.
Noted with thanks.
Well, I would say this. It's endearing because you're a personal friend. If I didn't know, I would probably be skeptical of the notion. But to that end, we can dig in a bit more. What is your background and what led you into Bitcoin?
A friend of mine told me many years ago to get some. And the first friend who told me that, I disregarded and I thought he was a kook. But eventually someone got to me and got me to at least start playing with it myself. And I held on to it and thought about it for a while. And it started to take over more and more thought of my thought life. But it was really the fact that my students wanted to talk about money, even in classrooms where that wasn't the explicit topic that we were assigned to talk about, that I started to teach classes explicitly on money, interdisciplinary stuff with the intersection of psychology, economics, philosophy. And Bitcoin is just classroom candy. It's a great way to get students to start thinking about big questions because they care about it and they want to know how to take advantage of some scam. You know, they're paying attention to crypto. They want to chase the latest pumps, but they also care more broadly too. They're curious and it pulls them into questions that I want them to think about, broader questions that inspire them to develop technical skill or the ability to make distinctions, you know, the kinds of stuff teachers really want their students to work on. And from there, it led to a research pivot as well. So with my co-authors, Brad Rettler and Craig Warmke, I'm holding up the book now for those only listening. We've written articles, now a book, and we have more stuff in progress that really tries to think carefully and clearly about Bitcoin using philosophy as a framing device, but also bringing everything to bear that we know from other disciplines as well. It's been a lot of fun. And it's kind of given my academic career new juice, new life. I was kind of getting bored with some of my old topics, but I'm not bored yet with crypto or even just with Bitcoin.
You found a purpose. It's very inspiring.
Okay, Ethereum's called the Infinite Garden. And it is. There's something right about that. It's a playground for builders, but it's a playground for thinkers too.
Yeah.
This tech stack.
That's awesome. Okay, so what does resistance money mean? If you had to synthesize it into one sentence, what does resistance money mean?
Resistance money is money that can route around authorities. Authorities use choke points to control and surveil. So if you can build a monetary system that bypasses them somehow, that's resistance money. Cash is one form of resistance money of at least one kind because you can trade it peer to peer and you can hold it, take self-custody of it using the kind of terms that crypto people use. You can put it in your fanny pack. So cash, physical cash is resistance money. We need cash in the digital realm to play a similar role. And that's really what Bitcoin was designed to do and what we think makes it special and worthy of scrutiny.
Yeah. So then, okay, let's kind of break down a little bit of your book and hopefully that can lead to some other interesting conversations. But there's a lot of Bitcoin books out there, you know, and I've read a lot myself. What differentiates resistance money? And in your mind, I know you sort of say this is a philosophical case for Bitcoin, but like what is the case you're making then?
A lot of books about Bitcoin look at it from one angle. For example, they look at it as freedom technology, censorship resistance. That's the only angle. Others look at it as number go up technology. The thesis is that you should buy Bitcoin because it will go up. Others look at it from a related but slightly distinct angle, which is monetary policy, trying to argue that every alternative fails in some way and Bitcoin is a superior technology or superior money. We're trying to do all of that and more. And the and more is where philosophy can add something special. One thing that we noticed is that when you think about Bitcoin, all of our biases come to bear. There's bag holder biases. Those who are long Bitcoin or who are short Bitcoin have special reason to want it to pump or to dump. There's reputational biases, as when somebody's been predicting for 10 plus years that Bitcoin will die and it still doesn't appear to have died. They get salty and they double down on their predictions, not because they're reacting to empirical evidence or because they have a good argument for that, but because their reputation demands that they do so or they look stupid. And their political biases too. For example, Bitcoin certainly appears to many Americans to be right-wing coded, which will activate all of our tribal biases and associations. So we tried to design a thought experiment to help us see through some of that. And the idea is pretty simple. You fall asleep, and when you wake up, you don't know who you'll be. You could be Michael Saylor sitting on a fat stack of Bitcoins. You could be Vitalik sitting on a smaller stack of Bitcoins, but he still has about 300 Bitcoin to his name last time he publicly disclosed. You could be a Venezuelan farmer. You could be Alexei Navalny. You could be anybody. So now, not knowing who you'd be, would you want to wake up in a world with Bitcoin or without? So this is a device to help us separate our own self-interest, our own personal place in the world from broader questions about what Bitcoin is doing, irrespective of who we are. Of course, you can't strip away your biases totally, but we still think it's helpful and can push us in the right direction to actually have a serious or sober analysis or evaluation of Bitcoin. So that's the framing device of the book. And then we just look through various dimensions of analysis like privacy, Bitcoin's successes or failures on that front, censorship resistance, financial inclusion, exclusion, environment and energy use, And then we cover about 25 different objections to Bitcoin along the way and show that though some of them succeed, most don't. And there's a net benefit to the world for having Bitcoin in it rather than without.
Thanks for listening to The Gwart Show on the Blockspace Podcast Network. Subscribe to our newsletter at blockspace.media to get the show directly to your inbox. Show links, transcripts, and Bitcoin articles twice per week. Stay ahead of the conversation by visiting blockspace.media.
Okay, so where do you think Bitcoin succeeds most in being resistance money? If you had to, I don't know, hammer down a single point in terms of, this is thus far we've seen success with Bitcoin being resistance money. What would your claim be?
There's some extremely sympathetic and well-known cases that we think give significant ethical weight here. So think about Roya Mahboob, not philosopher, software engineer. Good for her. She's not a philosopher. A software engineer in Afghanistan who, starting in 2013, started to serve a lot of international clients. They wanted to pay her in digital money somehow. Now, her entire team was women. They couldn't have bank accounts. Their husbands would take the money from them. So what did they use? They used Bitcoin. As it turns out, that was a really good deal for them, both to be able to receive money internationally without the permission or even cooperation or knowledge of their husbands or of any local bank. And for some, it was literally a lifesaver to be able to take that value with them and leave the country, leave an abusive situation, move to Europe, and take the value with them. You probably are familiar with other cases like this. War-torn Ukraine, family leaving Kyiv, going across the border to, I think it was Slovakia, or maybe it was Estonia. These are actual cases, concrete people that we know, or that are reported. These are known cases, and they don't know what their house is like, where half their family's wealth was stored. They have no access to banking. They couldn't take gold or paper with them. They'd be confiscated along the way or lost or difficult to take. But they can take 12 words in a bookmark or in their head. So This is a great way to use Bitcoin to leave a bad situation where authorities or where the situation may not cooperate.
Okay.
So you're not surprised by any of these cases. This is classic Bitcoiner evangelism.
Right. Exactly. And that's what exactly, I was going to start now diving into hopefully some more interesting topics.
Yeah, push back, please. Don't just have me spouting the talking points because we don't want to just spout talking points. And that's not what the book does really.
No, you have a very melodic flow to the way you speak. It's very endearing. Like I said, it sounds very philosophizer. Okay. So like here's a, I don't want to say counterpoint, but how do you square this with how often are Bitcoiners using this as, individual cases when maybe there's 10x the number of people using stable coins and storing their wealth with stable coins? So obviously I have my personal reasons why I find Bitcoin to be much more alluring than stable coins, right? But you go to somewhere, people bring this up all the time. It's a trite point at this juncture, but you go to Argentina, go to Venezuela, and people are storing their wealth in stable coins. What is the selling point of Bitcoin over stablecoins? Not that it's mutually exclusive, but in your mind right now, financial freedom, resisting oppression, why Bitcoin versus stablecoins? Or do we just have to accept that they will be used in tandem and that in reality, stablecoins are likely doing USDT on Tron is likely doing a lot more for financial inclusion than Bitcoin for the time being?
I'm open to that possibility that in terms of concrete people now, not using Bitcoin as insurance, but in fact, using stablecoins to enact freedom without somebody's permission. Yes, this happens. And there's a revealed preference to it. They'd rather use USDT on Tron than use Bitcoin. And if you've used both of these things, this will be absolutely no surprise to you. A buttery smooth, easy experience on the one side, and something that's very strange and slow, or at least can feel that way and cumbersome on the other, with an unstable unit of account. So the king, the US dollar is not just the king of unit of account, it's the emperor, worldwide dominant unit of account. So it's no surprise that people want to avail themselves of that. Now, the one kind of case where Bitcoin can succeed or even excel where stablecoins can't, or maybe the two, are first cases where your threat model involves US actors. Let's say that you're a sanctioned entity or you're a criminal of some kind where the US is after you. Now, a lot of these people are nasty people. They're the bad guys. So this is not a particularly sympathetic example to give, but that's the kind of person who actually would want to have a lot of Bitcoin or more Bitcoin than stablecoins, because stablecoins, especially the two dominant ones, can be frozen and blacklisted, and quite regularly are. There are facilities built into circles, set up and tethers to basically allow Treasury full access to everything and shut down anything whenever they like. And every month or so, Jeremy Allaire from Circle tweets about how compliant they are. He's fully signaling what's happening there. So if your threat model involves U.S. authorities, you are likely to want something outside of their reach, which would not be one of those stable coins. The other is if your threat model is inflation and you don't have access, or let's say you have access to U.S. dollars or to U.S. dollar substitutes, stable coins, but you are one of these preppers who thinks that the American dollar is itself a shitcoin. You prepare for the edge case by having gold, that's the old way, or by having Bitcoin, that's the new way. And a stablecoin, of course, can't do that for you by design. It's supposed to track the US dollar. So those are two cases where definitely Bitcoin has the edge. But I think it's important for Bitcoiners to concede just the actual pragmatic empirical facts here. Look, people like stablecoins. And look at that chart over time for stablecoin market cap. If you were an investor looking at this chart, you would want to invest because it basically goes like this. And unlike Bitcoin, it doesn't have these wild bear markets. It has pullbacks when stables get redeemed. And then the relentless demand continues to increase. So the people want them. People like stablecoins and they use them sometimes for freedom. Yes.
Okay. So then I want to ask your personal opinion here. Do you think that Bitcoiners have been overly aggressive or critical of stablecoins? Once again, your personal opinion. Do you think that Bitcoiners have gone out of their way to sort of demonize and alienate the very obvious demand for stablecoins in some attempt to push a evangelize Bitcoin? Because I think,
of course, obviously, some Bitcoiners have a vendetta against the dollar and are unwilling to recognize what the dollar is, which is the world's best money.
Yeah,
and I don't say that because it's the best in theory or that it's optimal, but people choose it for a reason. It's a pretty good money, and it makes trade-offs that Bitcoin doesn't make. Bitcoin makes pretty wild trade-offs in other directions to maximize for resistant properties to be able to route around authorities. But if you don't need those properties, the dollar is a great money. And if you have access to it, the dollar is a great money.
Are you a Bitcoin maxi?
I hold only Bitcoin in my crypto portfolio and have for many years now.
Okay.
If that makes me a maxi, then yes. But I like to think about other stuff. I'll play around with it in very small amounts. And I'm willing to learn from, if anybody wants to send me some free shitcoin to be able to play with it and look at the block explorer and mess around with smart contracts, of course I'll do that. Yes.
Okay, so what has been your sort of personal growth in that regard? Were you always, did you always lean Bitcoin maxi, or were you more open to, sorry, once again, I'm not trying to label you, but were you more open at some point and have become increasingly focused on Bitcoin, or has this always been the case for you?
There was a time when I had this sinking feeling that Ethereum was going to win. And it came from actually using Ethereum, from playing around with Solidity, making my first Hello World contract, launching a token of my own, figuring out how ERC20 contracts work, modifying the variables, and then adventuring further out. I'm just a script kiddie on this stuff. You just take stuff, copy and paste until it works. And seeing that I could start hacking and getting the pleasure centers of hacking activated in ways that I never could in the Bitcoin side, because I don't have any of the chops required to actually build on Bitcoin myself. And I just thought, okay, there's something here that's insanely cool that will capture minds. And this was confirmed, I felt, when I went to a blockchain education event here in Singapore. I didn't really know who's running it, what it would be, but my students invited me to go. So I went with them, and it turns out it was run by some Ethereum Foundation people. And they taught us all how to use Truffle, this little developer environment, no longer used as of earlier this year. But this little thing that allows you to play around with Solidity contracts and launch them in this little testnet. And by the time we left the event, everybody had some testnet ethers, had done a Hello World contract, and had a to-do list if they wished to advance further. And it was just insanely cool. So having experienced that and fiddled with it myself, I just thought, okay, Ethereum has something that Bitcoin doesn't, and Bitcoiners don't actually want it. Bitcoiners like stasis or ossification. So the very thing that could enable them to capture this kind of value, the gee whiz, the hacking, the feeling of openness that, wow, you can build anything you want in this. My dreams are my limits, and my dreams have no limits. So there are no limits. That amazing feeling that many of us had when we first encountered the internet or first learned how to code or how to build anything at all, even just to write, like, oh, holy shit, you could put letters together and make new stuff or new sound. You're like, this is great feeling, deeply human. It's the inventor mindset. Bitcoiners in some ways have rejected much of that. So I just thought, okay, that's an insane weakness. Ethereum, oh my God, I don't like Ethereum. I don't want it to win, but maybe it's going to win here.
Okay, so what changed your mind?
Well, again, the empirical facts don't always meet our expectations. One event that got me thinking and that surprised me was early on in 2021. You'll probably remember this when Binance Smart Chain, which is just an EVM clone, that is proof of authority. So it's not proof of work, which ETH was at the time, nor proof of stake, but it's like permission proof of stake. There's 21 validators, 17 of which were run by Binance, something like that. Maybe all of them are, I forget. It was faster than Ethereum and had all these cool scams you could play with, and PancakeSwap to pull it all together. And it was cheaper than Ethereum. It didn't take $10 or $20 to launch a contract or to do a transaction. Pennies on the dollar compared to Ethereum. So it was faster and cheaper. And then all this liquidity, TVL, as well as daily volume, started to move towards BSC. And then, so the light bulb or the change, in my own opinion, there was, what's Lindy here? What's sticky is maybe the EVM. It is not ETH. It's not Ethereum, the developer community or that world that's linked to the unit of account, ETH. It's something else. Users aren't loyal in the ways that I thought they might be. It's not as sticky as I thought it was. So I think I updated to increase my confidence in the stickiness of EVM, but decreased my confidence in the stickiness of the Ethereum proper ecosystem.
Do you still have confidence in the stickiness of the EVM? Well, also, actually, let me go back 1 second. A lot of Ethereans would point to the, still dominant TVL and usage.
That was a 1 quarter event. The BSC takeover, that was basically Q1, maybe part of Q2 2021. And then ETH rocketed maybe in April or something in terms of a bunch of these metrics.
Yeah. So do you think that is a counterpoint to your point, or no? That a lot of the liquidity has now remained on ETH and Ethereum and the ecosystem continues to grow? It
did until Solana came back.
Yeah.
So, you chart this over time. We're basically seeing the same story. The BSC story is echoing again with Solana. And it seems to me it's echoing at slightly higher volumes this time. And the Solana community is slightly more aggressive and less fun, and less about playing around on PancakeSwap and more about domination. They're there to play to win for keeps. That's the vibe I get from people like Kyle Salami, at least, is that there is a figurehead. There's more than one, in fact. And they've got a plan. And they also have a bigger differentiator, which is a different vision for scaling and a better user experience than a pure EVM clone like BSC could ever offer.
Yeah.
So I see. So yes, Ethereum regained its position of dominance within that quadrant of crypto, but it's once again challenged, and the challenge appears stronger to me this time.
Yeah.
Not for all of crypto, but at least for some smart contracty quadrant of it.
I completely agree.
Does that seem right to you? What do you think?
I think you're spot on, but I think that there was, so we had EOS early on, BSC, Avalanche, Phantom. There have been many so-called ETH killers that Ethereans point to and say, this was supposed to be an ETH killer and it did not succeed in killing Ethereum. So as a result, my, what I have to go off of is that Ethereum won't be killed. Now, totally
reasonable.
Well, exactly.
That these waves come in and Ethereum withstands is evidence of stickiness. Yes. Even if the waves get bigger, Ethereum is still there.
Agree. Yeah,
amazing.
I completely agree, and I think that the reason I think this is an interesting conversation, by the way, just for some context here, because you're a philosopher and a Bitcoiner, so some listeners may be wondering why I'm interested to have this conversation with you. I think that you looking at this from the outside, maybe a bit more objectively, right? You're not in the weeds on Solana and you're not in the weeds on Ethereum. It may allow you to see something that others may not see. And I generally agree with you that, and I had this conversation not too long ago with somebody where I said Solana is the first real competitor. And if you predicate your kind of belief set on there have been many ETH killers and none of them have really panned out, then the logical conclusion is that ETH will not be killed, or kill maybe is a strong word anyhow, right? Like just lose market share, whatever kind of determinants you want to use. But if you view these other chains that cropped up not having had success as proof that there's some very strong lendiness, network effects, staying power with Ethereum, then you're not going to. You may not bat an eye at Solana, right? But I think I agree with you that the vibe has generally shifted, and I'm still not entirely sure why exactly that is. I think you're spot on about Solana is differentiated enough with its attempt at scaling, basically through hardware, right? Like that's what they're saying. Like we're going to put everything on a single layer, and that is the value proposition. That is different than the bulk of the other chains. They were also, there's also a different, virtual machine. There's the SVM versus the EVM. But it is interesting to hear that from you as somebody who, probably just kind of observes passively and says, there may be something with Solana that these other chains never really facilitated.
Yeah, passively is right, except in this respect. I do have Bitcoin, so my bags naturally pull me, and the bias is to hope that they all die by Bitcoin's hand. I don't expect or predict that, by the way.
Yeah, I don't really share that view, honestly. Like, I don't care so. I mean, I have sort of made my bet, if you will, that there's likely to be a single non-sovereign store of value that persists, and I think there's a lot of incentive.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, digital non-sovereign store of value. I should add that in there, and that is likely sucks up a tremendous amount of the liquidity and sort of the mind share and staying power. And right now, if we're going off sort of our observed realities, that is Bitcoin, right? It has 4 or 5x the market cap of Ethereum, right? And so like if I'm looking at the past and I'm looking at, okay, Ethereum had its all-time high against Bitcoin in 2017, and since then it has trended down.
January of 18, I think.
Okay, January of 18, and since then it has only trended downwards. It's not like it's more just like I'm pointing out what I have personally observed, right? I don't know this is such a strong like dogmatic view as much as I'm saying, look, like in terms of the world congregating around a non-sovereign store of value, like right now it looks very likely to be Bitcoin. Could that change? Sure. I mean, the world can change, but all of the evidence presented in the past 8 years, 9 years, or if you want to go back to the inception of Bitcoin, has been that mostly these coins trend down versus Bitcoin. So, but sorry, that was a bit of a digression.
There are exceptions, as we discussed when you were here in Singapore.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of interesting. Yeah, there have been, I don't know, 4 or 5, I think, coins that have made multi 4-year cycle highs against BTC.
There might be a new one within the next week. The XRP army might be able to pull that off. Who knows?
Is it actually close to making a new all-time high?
In dollar terms, yes. Not in Bitcoin terms. It's still pretty far away in Bitcoin terms. Yeah,
not in Bitcoin terms. So that's mainly the point I was making, just in Bitcoin terms.
Right.
Why do you think that? Why do you think that? Like we look at this and kind of come to these conclusions, and then there's, I mean, the very obvious answer is bag holder, tribalistic bias, but whatever. But what do you find interesting about this? This sort of trajectory of coins versus Bitcoin over the long run.
Maybe the first thing that I would observe is just that I find it surprising. There's so many coins, and there's so many different kinds of narratives and ways to get it to squeeze a new pump out of new entrants. So you squeeze it from the TradFi guys, you squeeze the retail people, you squeeze the TikTok people with many different angles available. You could have a new tech stack. You could have a new value proposition. You could have new partners. And this is basically what every one of these coins does. Of the million coins, they find different iterations of exit liquidity and stories to extract value out of those people to get them to buy the coin. So why is it that so few have ever managed to get a multi-cycle high against Bitcoin, denominated in Bitcoin? The more I think about it, the more puzzling it is, because there really are a lot of different ways to extract value out of people, to tell at least initially compelling story, and then to tell an even better one 4 years later. And add to that sometimes these stories are true. So look at the Ethereum story that they might tell. They talk about how many developers work in the chain, in the ecosystem, on the EVM, on scaling, on privacy, on regulation, on research, on marketing. You look at the treasuries of the Ethereum Foundation, which is then dwarfed by the total size of treasuries of all the other foundations and labs and centers and foundations and other firms associated with this. These teams have lawyers, they have developers, they've got everything. So they can spin new stories. So I guess the two things I'm most surprised are, first, there's so few, but of the few that have succeeded, why isn't Ethereum one of them? And I don't raise that because I know the answer. In fact, I puzzle over it. I wanted to come here having an answer because we said we would discuss this. I actually don't have an answer. I don't have a clear one for why Ethereum hasn't managed to be one of the few that has gotten multi-cycle highs against Bitcoin. There's so many things on their side. Of course, Bitcoiners are quick to point out the things that are against them. Yes, it was an ICO coin. Yes, there are massive, accordingly, holdings in fairly concentrated hands. We don't know exactly, but the best guesses we have from people on the inside are that people like Joe Lubin, massive ag holders, and these are impediments to growth.
Yeah,
and we could point to other standard Bitcoin talking points. We don't need to do that.
Right.
Bitcoiners would line all those up and say, "Oh yeah, see, of course, ETH will die against Bitcoin over time." I'm not so sure. I'm still a little bit surprised, actually.
Well, I think the reality, this is something that, Udi and Eric, I guess I've heard Udi mention this a lot. I think he's spot on. It's like people don't care about that stuff. I mean, the 99% of people entering the market do not care about some of the reservations that OG Bitcoiners may have. I don't think, right?
Oh, it's an ICO.
Yeah. Who cares? Right.
What's an ICO?
Yeah.
Says someone who got into crypto in 2021.
Right. And I also think that I saw this tweet recently. It was like kind of funny. It's like there's almost an assumption from a lot of entrants, and this, I'm not applying this to ETH or even the Ethereum ecosystem necessarily. I'm just applying this to crypto at large, is that there's almost an assumption that a lot of it's a massive scam when people get in. So like pointing out that, ETH did some ICO, which all things considered, if you're going to do an ICO, might look quite fair in many people's eyes, right? Like a lot of Ethereans point to how fair the ICO is. Whether or not that's true,
an open pre-sale is better than Ripple's 100% allocation to Jeb, Chris, and Brad.
Right, exactly. So like there's some irony in thinking that these are talking points, and I do find myself just reading Bitcoiners' comments, pre-mine ICO scan. It's like, this is just, it clearly has not manifested itself. Just the fact that Ethereum's still around and it continues to attract developers and people continue to believe in the vision is a counterpoint to whether or not, people care about this stuff. So I think you have been in this space a while, and so it's interesting to talk to you, right? But the reality is that like, I don't care about that stuff, and other people shouldn't care about this stuff either. And if anything, at this point, I think it may be a detractor to a lot of the value propositions that Bitcoin can put forth over other crypto or, cryptocurrencies fighting amongst each other. Most of these things don't matter,
And it may be that something similar, we could have a similar perspective if we ask the same question we're asking about Ethereum, but ask it about Bitcoin from the outside perspective. Right. So somebody from the outside might be asking, well, wait a minute. This thing had a secretive founder who nobody knows what it is. It's not backed by anything. It has these wild 85%, 90% drawdowns every once in a while. Why in the world hasn't this thing died?
Exactly.
And those of us who've been around for a while know to roll our eyes at those people. And it's like, brah, if you don't get it, you're never going to get it. You're asking the wrong questions. It's here to stay. Just acknowledge that and move along and ask if it can do anything for you instead of pulling your hair out about its secretive founder or occasional catastrophic drops in value. Those who've been around for a while simply accept both of those facts and are no longer bothered by them. So also for Ethereans and the ICO, Vitalik's ongoing role in Ethereum development and road mapping and so on. You just have to accept that. Accept reality is generally a good principle to live by.
Okay, let's pivot back to philosophy a second. What do you think about the philosophy of Ethereum? Do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm not sure that there is a coherent one. If I had to say what the philosophy of Bitcoin was, I would say it's the cypherpunk philosophy married to number go up. I'm not totally clear that there is a unifying vision like that, either embodied in Ethereum's design or even just in a decentralized way, sort of spread across the people who make the most important choices about how Ethereum unfolds. I'm not sure.
Okay, let me ask.
Do you want to lay out some principles or give me some material to work on?
Yeah. Okay, so what do you think? I don't know how often you read like Vitalik's writings, and sometimes he does opine on maybe more social or abstract ideas that aren't as technical in nature. What do you think about some of the vision that Vitalik puts forth for Ethereum?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask about his other stuff about social vision, like artificial wombs.
we can get into that, but just first and foremost, maybe just the big abstract here, his ideas for Ethereum.
One thing I've noticed is a persistent interest on his part to develop, let's say, non-financial applications on Ethereum. This is in the white paper. It's on later versions of the white paper. He's sometimes explicit about this, and sometimes it's more implicit just by what one can read this off of the kinds of examples he gives. And I've always been puzzled by that. Bitcoin, of course, started out as something that was supposed to be money, useful for commerce. I think the word commerce appears in the very first sentence of the Bitcoin white paper. There's no question that this is electronic cash for payments. It's money. And Vitalik has always shied away from that, or at least tried to include other stuff that doesn't look like that. I've never totally been clear why, but it looks to me like that is a deep-seated principle on which he acts. So maybe you've noticed this. I see you're nodding. Maybe
Yes.
you've noticed this and you have thoughts about why that is. Here's a hypothesis. I'm not saying this is more likely than not, but there's a lot of people who think that money is morally dubious. It's dirty somehow. And so if you can separate yourself from it, you're better off. So for example, in my world, academia, sometimes academics are proud about how poor they are because they think it's a sign of virtue, that they're not being paid lots of money. They're somehow cleaner. Their hands aren't as filthy as people in banking or finance or management consulting. That's not my view, but you can kind of see that cleanliness style of thinking, of moral thinking. Maybe that's going on here. Maybe it's marketing. Maybe it's something deeper. I'm not sure. What do you think?
Yeah, I wrote this tweet one time. Like, obviously, I was trolling, but there's
Obviously, yes.
Oftentimes I see Vitalik.
There's truth in your troll, though. I would say
Well, I would
7
hope
times
so.
out of 9, there's truth to your troll.
Okay. Yeah, I see Vitalik oftentimes citing paying for coffee with rye or something like that. I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here. Or ENS or DAOs, right? And these are all things that exist in the sense that, I mean, that they functionally do exist in some capacity. But in terms of their, I don't want to say impact, but in terms of the percentage of users doing that stuff versus financial engineering, Ponzi games, staking, looping, trading, borrowing, lending, it's very, very small. I would say, maybe I'm once again just throwing out random numbers here, but maybe 1% of the transactions or use cases on Ethereum are sort of one step removed from pure financial engineering. And there does seem to be, and also this has been, I would say, recurring and maybe, like you said, from his writings, this has kind of been going on since inception, I would say. So it's nothing new necessarily, but
NFTs as concert tickets and NFTs as collectibles that accrue value over time. Yeah, this has been with us for a long time.
Yeah, but I do wonder sometimes, does the percentage of activity in aggregate on a chain, should we look at this and say, okay, like what percentage? Okay, let me give a more concrete example. I'm not being so articulate right now. If you were to look at a blockchain and say, okay, we need to define this as a casino or not. I'm being extreme here, right? What percentage of sort of casino-like activity would you need the total aggregate transactions to be able to look at something and say, that's a casino, right? 50%, 75%? What about 99%? What about 99% of sort of zero sum or, not sort of circular financial engineering games? And once again, I'm being extreme and calling it a casino. I don't know it doesn't really matter whether or not it's a casino, but this Ouroboros that Vitalik talks about, like at what point can we say that's an Ouroboros, right? And I oftentimes wonder if you could assign a percentage, if that would help people more, because people, I think, are very inclined to say, well, there is real usage in stablecoins, and people can't, people need to be able to borrow against their pristine collateral and so on and so forth. But I'm sitting here, I'm like, that's such a small, it's minuscule, it's almost irrelevant percentage of what actually occurs on these chains. And when you have this disconnect, it's very difficult because it's so subjective, right? There's no way to define whether something is a legitimate or illegitimate use case, and there's no point in doing so. But it does make you wonder, right? Like when Vitalik's writing about buying coffee with rye and being able to spin up a DAO to fund decentralized science experiments. I'm like, it's almost like, are we looking at the same thing? You know what I mean? You observe it, and we're clearly, I'm not observing what you're observing.
There may be a parallel once again in the Bitcoin world. Think about the 1% of Bitcoin activity that is journalists, dissidents, opposition politicians.
Completely agree. Couldn't agree more.
The sympathetic uses of resistance money. And then, of course, we have the non-sympathetic uses of resistance money, which is sanctions evasion, ransomware, buying and selling nasty stuff online, drugs, guns, assassinations, and child pornography, all that stuff. Okay, so that's 1%, 2%, 5% of Bitcoin on-chain volume. And how much of the rest is just coins moving to and from Binance hot wallets and cold wallets?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And that I'm not comparing.
Oh, I am.
Yeah.
I see a parallel here because it's tempting to say there's the real stuff and the not real stuff, or there's legitimate stuff and the not legitimate stuff. And when you're pumping your chain or talking your book, you want to talk about the real stuff because it makes you sound both morally better and makes it sound like there's fundamental value at play. That is a tool that people can use to be happier, that can improve human flourishing and well-being by having access to this tool. And then there's a bunch of speculation built around it, the Ouroboros. So it's part marketing to emphasize that. But I think there's a truth here. At least I'll speak to the Bitcoin case, that there is a kernel of fundamental demand, things that Bitcoin can do that other monies can't, and people have to turn to Bitcoin, so they do. And once something is valuable to someone and scarce, it's valuable to others too, even if they don't want to use it for that purpose. So think about me. I don't want to live in a boat. Well, let's say I knew there's a bunch of people who want to live in boats and there was a fixed number of boats. Yeah, I'd buy one so I could rent it or sell it to the boat people at my leisure, even though I don't want to live in it. So also you'll buy some Bitcoin because you know there's somebody out there who needs Bitcoin. Same for Ether. There's somebody out there who needs to have a DAO, and a DAO that makes other DAOs. They're desperate for this. It's constitutive of their happiness. And so you buy some Ether so that they have to buy it from you when it's time for them to launch their contracts or execute commands with them.
What do you think about the and you
shout out to our friend Nick, who builds DAOs that build DAOs.
DAOs inside of DAOs. What do you think about once again, this is very abstract, but do you feel that Bitcoin has more of a singular purpose in being money than Ethereum has in attempting to be the world computer, and why the market may have reacted to that?
Of course. And the purpose is matched by a more limited range of technical options. Bitcoin its garden is less infinite than Ethereum's by design.
Yeah.
We could have added opcodes long ago, or we could have added back the opcodes that were disabled in 2010. We didn't. So this is an explicit choice collectively made by the developers and then in cooperation with the community. And it is tied to a narrower vision of what Bitcoin is, which is just money. So yes, absolutely. And that's, somebody can look at that and say, you know what? I get that. That's why I want it. It's the one thing that can do what other things can't. It's scarce. I want some. I understand it. Please take my dollars now for your Bitcoins. So it can be a selling point.
What do you?
The other side, it's been classically thought of by Ethereans as the opposite of selling point, though, that a more versatile tool is the more precious one.
And that's sort of what I was getting at, and I sort of touched on this earlier, is like Ethereum, I think. So I listened to this podcast recently with Justin Drake, and he said that in order to win the money use case, you need to win the utility use case. In order to win the utility use case, you need to win the money use case. Ethereum has always been, ETH, the asset, I guess, has always been more, I'm being very reductive here, but I think it's always been more useful, more easily, it's been more versatile on chain, starting with ICOs. ETH was the pair asset, DeFi Summer, staking, restaking, all of this uses ETH. And so this notion that utility is a critically important point, I have felt that this is wrong, and I think I would agree with
one version of it, but not another. So maybe we can distinguish two theses here. The first thesis is that, let's call it base level utility, is necessary for value of the token, and not just necessary, but a key catalyst, and that it leads. Another claim, a related claim though, which is slightly stronger, is that, let's say, extensible utility is, for that very purpose, better. And we have basically a straightforward comparison of these two approaches with Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now, Bitcoin does have a base level utility on which although the rest of its value is built, in my opinion, which is just its ability to send, receive, and store value without the cooperation of people who make money, who manage it, or who serve as intermediaries in transactions. So 3 kinds of mediators are eliminated with Bitcoin. It's a very simple use case. It's money that routes around authorities. And then the one question then is, okay, well, do we get enhanced value by having more extensible utility? And there's a kind of you might abstractly guess that yes, something that's more useful. A Swiss Army knife is more precious than just a knife. But in fact, maybe not. A knife that doesn't have all these other doodads might be easier to use. It might be easier to understand. It might be easier to store. It might be easier to clean. So this is a goofy analogy maybe, but I think there's analogs of that to Bitcoin, that Bitcoin is easier to understand because it's just money. It's easier to use because there's no smart contracts to fuck around with. Well, I mean, there's script, but nobody plays around with those. And ordinary people just send and receive Bitcoin. It's easy to clean and to store. Just 12 words, brah. 12 words. That's it. So the simplicity of a Bowie knife versus a Swiss Army knife. And there's a kind of nerd who's always attracted to more extensibility and a tool that you can do more with. But someone who's in a survival situation might reach for the Bowie knife instead. And a goofy analogy, but I think that roughly captures the difference in approach. And I think the world has drifted towards, at least for now, the Bowie knife rather than the Swiss Army knife.
Well, I completely
as the
agree.
base case of value. And then there's everything else built on top of that. People saying, there's only 21 million Bowie knives. I don't really need one because I'm not going to kill a deer, but somebody else might want it. So I'm going to buy 5 right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And this is kind of the point I was making in terms of what we can the market can be wrong. Like, there's no doubt the market can be wrong. But for the past 8 years, the market has generally drifted toward, the single purpose knife. And so I'm interested that it's still pushed as an ongoing narrative, this idea of utility, right? And what I could be wrong. We could be wrong. Utility could be people could end up not caring about a non-sovereign digital store value. That they could. That could just happen. But it is interesting that this notion of the, utility in DeFi and utility and being able to use it across all these chains, and it hasn't really manifested itself in the market. I wouldn't say so. I'm honestly, it reinforces this notion to me that it seems that the enduring value proposition is the non-sovereign store value. Like that to me is where the liquidity aggregates, if you will.
I agree that is one use case around which capital has coalesced. But I actually think that the use that underlies that is still payments. It's usefulness for payments that makes possible usefulness for payments to oneself over time, which is what store value is.
Right, but if
it's a special case.
Right, but I guess the point, and this kind of goes to, I've talked to a number of people who worked on Lightning, right? And Lightning is very cumbersome, and there's like clear problems. I mean, maybe that's not the exact word, but there's this inbound liquidity issue where you have to create an on-chain transaction in order to open a Lightning channel. Ideally, this wouldn't be the case, right? This is not the case with Ethereum L2s. You can receive ETH on an L2 directly to a wallet without having to incur an on-chain transaction. That's a real value proposition. So there are like limitations. I hear a lot of people talk about how complicated and annoying Lightning is to work with, liquidity routing, blah, 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 all these things. And yet the single biggest, not complaint, but problem I hear with people who have worked on Lightning is there's just not that much demand to use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, as a method of payment. And if you're, if you believe in Bitcoin, if you believe in the long-term vision, that's the rational thing to do right now, is to hold the money that has a fixed supply and spend the money that has an ever-increasing supply. And so it's not, I oftentimes, I'm a little bit more sympathetic to just the fact that all Bitcoiners want to do is hold it. It's like, yeah, for the time being, right? And until this sort of continues to grow and I don't know if you want to use the word hyper Bitcoinize or whatever, but that makes sense. Why would you do anything but hold it?
Well, many people clearly share your view. A word or a phrase I'm tempted to reach for here is product market fit, where you don't try to make people want something they don't want. Instead, you look at what they want and make something that meets their needs where they are. So that's the classic management consultant way of thinking about this, is look for product market fit. Now, there is one important exception to this, which we might call the Steve Jobs Minority Report, according to which the market is run by bozos who don't know what they want or what they need. And the thing about that approach is that most of the time it's deeply misguided. It's pure cope. When you are stuck saying the market is bozos and they don't know what they want, what they need and what they want is decentralization and extensibility, or payments that work through channels and that do this, that, and the other thing. And people actually should be paying for coffee every day with Bitcoin. You don't sound like Steve Jobs anymore to me. It sounds like cope.
Yeah.
But we have to make room for the Steve Jobs edge cases where somebody really does have the insight to say, every consultant here, every piece of information we have for the market suggests that people don't want, or they want keyboards in their phones. They're bozos. They're wrong. They don't want, if they really knew what was good for them, they wouldn't want keyboards on their phones.
What have you seen?
These are edge cases though.
What have you seen elsewhere in crypto then that you would like to bring to Bitcoin?
Stablecoins, Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, and in a trust-reduced way. Now, it's not by any means obvious how to do any of that. The obvious way right now is just with wrapped Bitcoin on Maker or something like that. But I'd like to have it all be on Bitcoin and have access to US dollar unit of account that's backed by Bitcoin. That's something that I would use personally. Now, the other thing I would use personally is Zcash level privacy. What if we could have shielded transactions on Bitcoin or their equivalent without giving up custody? So we can have something which is, in terms of privacy, their equivalent or good enough, which is eCash, but that comes at the price of custody. But so those would be my requests. And I don't need the financial games. I'm just speaking for myself here. Like what I would actually use. The Ponzi's and the Ponzoos. I believe there's a difference. Token pumps, financial games. I'm not really interested in any of that, but I would love to have in my Bitcoin wallet taken in self-custody Bitcoin backed stables that are shielded with Zcash level privacy or better.
Yeah. Okay. So
wouldn't that be awesome? I mean, that's true digital cash. That's always the dream.
I would
pay for my coffee with that.
Yeah. So the I don't know, counterpoint, but I guess what I would just point out is that the notion of decentralized stables has been around for a very long time. Maker was sort of the first big viable attempt at this, and we've seen people gravitate toward centralized stables and
more capital efficient.
Exactly. And so a lot of times, and it's quite interesting because so I did this episode with Justin Drake. I think it'll come out right before this episode. But I asked him about this, and I said, after the merge, you really had this big push about decentralized stablecoins, and this idea that ETH is pristine collateral, and people should borrow against this and use a decentralized stablecoin. And this is another one of these kind of just observed realities. The vast majority of people want centralized stables, it appears, right? USDT on Tron, centralized stable. Base now with USDC, they're making, I don't know how, implicit or explicit this is, but they're making a strong push for stables as the kind of viable use case for base chain and crypto at large, right? And I've mentioned this before, but I hear people who are very well respected, like some of the leaders in the crypto space, talk about stablecoins are the killer use case. Anatoly from Solana says this. Now, he has a little bit of a different vision, but I don't think he's wrong necessarily, right? Everything points to centralized stables being the killer use case. So when I hear people talk about decentralized stables, like I have a friend, this guy C-Node, he's like big on decentralized stables. He's like very ideologically driven. And I'm like, the reality is that it's just not that much demand for this, right? And so I kind of want this kind of goes to your point about, do we give people what they want or do they not know what they want? And I look at, first of all, I don't know that centralized stables on Bitcoin is great from a, sort of control of the chain type perspective. This has been a discussion in Ethereum, right? So pretty serious
threats there.
Right. And so then we come to decentralized stables and I say, okay, well, if Maker was dominating and they weren't, largely backed by USDC, I may agree with you. But that's like the reality is that people have not demanded these. So I don't know.
Well, that's what I can say is that I demand them, and you can therefore conclude that I'm a weirdo. I'm an outlier. I'll tell you the reason that I would like more private and something closer to US dollar unit of account is that, and decentralized, that is without a centralized issuer holding treasuries in custody or something, is that I'd like that as insurance against various other threats, like Bitcoin price crashes on the one hand, so that's the unit of account, and like incoming or extant authoritarian rule on the other. I'd like to be able to spend my money as I please, and privacy helps with that. But until somebody has felt the threat of one or both of those things, they're not going to have the demand for these products. Just seeing them, it's not like an iPhone where once you see it, you want it. No, I think you have to suffer before you will want a product like a privacy product. You have to have somebody who's after you, who's trying to spy on you, and then you see the value of privacy. That tends to be the way the human beings work, at least.
What if we just don't end up suffering. This is a kind of like I'll give a little
the cypherpunk dystopian nightmare never happens.
Well, I'm glad,
or it happens, but it's not actually that bad, and we don't suffer and care that much about it, and so we never needed digital cash. That's the scenario?
No, hang on. I'm glad we have Bitcoin specifically. I'm like exposing biases here, which is fine. It's nobody really, I don't think, is deeply offended by anything I say, or maybe they are, but either way,
they probably care less than you think they do, sir.
Exactly. And also they shouldn't take anything I say at face value to begin with. But the point I'm making here is like, it seems that, I guess it kind of goes to, I was saying this the other day, like, you know, a lot of DeFi developers, a lot of these people who are, you know, at least outwardly sort of concerned about being thrown in jail and being debanked. And to be clear, I do think the debanking thing is very legitimate. I think it is very concerning. And I think there is a lot of evidence to support that this has been sort of a managed operation. But with regards to like a lot of these DeFi developers and stuff, you know, mostly they don't actually get in that much trouble. And I'm really being conscientious with my word choice here, but like these people aren't usually thrown in jail. I think the Tornado Cash stuff is extremely concerning, and that is something we should fight for. I think privacy is something we should fight for, and that sort of dystopian future is something that concerns me. With a lot of these kind of projects, you know, they face like civil charges, and they have the money, they have the lawyers to sort of extend this, and now we have this new Trump regime, and we'll see what happens here. But it could just be that we've sort of won in the sense of this vampire attack, and like a lot of this stuff just kind of gets allowed. Like you can just launch tokens on pump.fun and not go to jail, and it's fine, right? And so I want to be clear. I'm glad we have something like Bitcoin that I do feel is a real viable option to opt out. And I also do buy into the notion that it keeps centralized actors honest, you know, and maybe that's the benefit of DeFi and crypto as a whole, is that we can opt out now. We can launch security. We can launch 1,000 securities a day and completely circumvent the financial system. And maybe just the esoteric ideal of, you know, permissionless innovation is enough. Does it justify all of the charades that we've gone through? I'm not sure. But the point is like it's true. People are launching tokens every single day, and so I just wonder if like
50,000 on a good day.
Yeah, see, we're knocking these things out. Like, I do wonder if a lot of this stuff just becomes sort of co-signed, and maybe like these stable coins and the ability to have a decentralized stable coin may just be enough that the government nation states realize that enforcement is extremely difficult, right? We got the internet now. It's very hard to enforce rules.
Indeed. I don't disagree with any of that.
Yeah.
It's a good rant.
It's a diatribe. Okay, you were very on this note. You co-authored a piece on Worldcoin, and I read it, I don't know, 6 months ago now, and I can't recall exactly the point. So if you could tell us what was the motivation to write about Worldcoin and the orbs.
Worldcoin is a token that you get when you scan your eyeballs. And it was started by Alex, somebody, and Sam Altman. And the thing that got me and my co-author really riled up, and occasionally we get riled up about this again, we threatened to write a sequel to this op-ed, is the use of, well, there's a couple things we found suspicious about Worldcoin. The first was the appearance of unsubstantiated promises throughout the documentation and marketing. So here's an easy example. They promise that once they scan your eyeballs, they'll totally delete the information. They'll never have access to the actual scan. It's just a hash of a scan. And then that is used in fancy zero-knowledge cryptography anyways. So nothing bad can possibly be done with it. Now, has this been definitively established? No. Are there proofs behind the promises? No. When it comes to sensitive biometric data, though, that seems like sort of a dubious thing to do, to ask someone to just trust you here. So this is the first red flag. Now, a second red flag is the way this has been launched. Now it's called a Worldcoin. Has it been launched around the world? Well, not in the United States, where its founders are from, where Sam Altman lives and moves and has his being. No, it's mostly been in the developed world. And many of the people who have had their eyeballs scanned apparently don't really know what's going on. They just get paid some cash and scan their eyeballs. Now, that should immediately start to sound weird and maybe exploitative or colonial, or at least have the possibility of that. You should start asking more questions about what's going on. So that was another thing we complained about. There's grubby tokenomics. This is basically a SAM coin that is of SBF. It's just a different SAM this time, where you have a bunch of these tokens locked up, and then there's small float, and you manipulate the supply of that by releasing to market makers in pretty calculated ways to pump the fully diluted value. Weird financial games to be played with that Sam Bankman-Fried did with great effect in the FTT and Serum days. And what was the other one? MAP? MAP? Was that it? The other Sam coin?
MAPS token. That was a legendary one.
MAPS. That's it. Yeah. So this is just another SAM token. It's just we swapped out one SAM for another. And maybe a final thing we complain about that is worrisome to me is that once a system like this is actually successful, you have something that you can't change, biometric data, potentially linked to something that you can't opt out of. Now, the classic answer to this on the part of Worldcoin apologists is that through zero knowledge proofs, we can actually prove that you have a real world identity that's been verified and attached to an eyeball scan, and then sign that proof without disclosing which eyeball it is. And that's true. Zero knowledge proofs can prove things without disclosing what is proved. Okay, great. Yes, we know that. That is what ZK is for. But will ZK be used in this way? Or could merchants be directed to only allow transactions associated with whitelisted eyeballs, or to blacklist certain eyeballs? And the thing here is that eyeballs, this is not Minority Report. You can't change them. So if the system is actually successful and used widely for payments or for anything that's actually necessary, then the possibility of blocking someone is even more, it looms larger. And of course, with cash, this isn't a problem. Of course, with Bitcoin, this isn't a problem. If an address is blacklisted, even if it's blacklisted by Coinbase and Binance and everyone else and every merchant on the planet, dude, you just make a new address and get some fresh coins, buy coins with cash, submarine swap to Lightning, CoinJoin, whatever it takes. And from a new wallet or new address, you spend. But you can't get new eyeballs. So thus ends the rant. We hate this thing. I'm moderate about a lot of other crypto stuff. I'm not moderate about this one. I just think this is unequivocally bad.
Yeah, but I guess, to be fair, I haven't followed Worldcoin so closely. I know they launched an L2, which is not a differentiating property of any coin at this point, but I think they have their own L2. They have apparently very smart people working on this. It's not something that I care much about, but I guess I'm curious, does this have any staying power? Like, have you followed whether or not this has, I've seen the orb, I've seen people in, I don't know, countries scanning their eyeballs and getting a few tokens, but is this something that it actually seems to scale? Like, should this concern us? I haven't seen much in terms of, like, I guess going back to product market fit, like, does anybody even care about this, or is it going anywhere?
So far, blessedly, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Either in actual use or even in speculation on it, which is a kind of leading indicator of possible future use. So I just pulled up the chart right now. It's all-time high back in March and doesn't appear anywhere close to recovering that. Now, because this is one of the SAM coins, this may not be a totally reliable way to eyeball things, but I think we are blessedly safe from the dystopia that I earlier described. Yeah. So far as we know.
Okay. Last thing we should talk about, and this now loops back into some philosophizing. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. There was a lot of inspiration taken last cycle from effective altruism, utilitarianism, and you mentioned, SBF and how he was going about extracting value. What is the philosopher's take on this? Maybe effective altruism specifically.
We could separate a couple different constituent theses of effective altruism. One is just that you should make a lot of money and then give it away. Two is that you should be effective and empirically informed in how you give money away, that you should give it to things that are good rather than bad, and of the ones that are good, give it to the ones that are better rather than merely okay. So give to malaria blocking mosquito nets instead of giving to, I don't know, what's good but not great charity, instead of giving to a university that already has plenty of money, but that could on the margin allow a slightly less rich person to attend. And then maybe a third and most controversial thesis that's part of that package is that we should pay a special attention to people who don't exist yet and existential threats to humanity as a whole. The idea is sometimes called long-termism. The idea being that we look ahead into various possible futures in which disasters or blessed nirvanas occur and try to stave off the possible existential disasters where the species is wiped out or where most of us are miserable, and enhance the possibility of these euphoric futures. These are the kinds that Eric Wall sometimes talks about. The what is it? Is the permacum? I think he calls it the possible future where everybody is more or less just orgasming 24/7.
Eric got like super nerd sniped into AI takeover. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, so maybe I shouldn't bring that up. But so part of this thinking is that the way to be effective in your altruism, this is not in fact just givewell.org. It's not just recommending malaria blocking mosquito nets. That's a fairly benign form of effective altruism. Instead, it's designing your giving plan so that it blocks off the existential threats you think are going to happen, even not going to happen, but are the worst if they did happen. So even if they're very, very low chance, 0.1% chance of happening, the magnitude, the negative the disutility of it happening is so bad that this kind of dwarfs the rest of your values and weights in your decision making. And my own view is that the first two components of EA are kind of okay. Yeah, sure. Make a lot of money, then give it away. Thumbs up, brah. Also, if you're going to give it away effectively rather than non-effectively. Okay, cool. Another thumbs up. But on the long-termism, I'm much more cautious about our ability to reasonably suss out the probabilities here. And because I think the future is murky, especially if we look 100 years into the future, we're thinking about futures that are so different from ours, then I think it's basically just our biases talking. It's the kinds of things that my brain is attracted to, maybe natively, maybe weird things like AI. What is it? The paperclips.
Yeah.
The paperclip AI thing. There's a certain kind of brain that's attracted to that, to thinking about it, because it's just a weird thing to think about, but it's kind of cool too. And then it dominates your decision making. And all of a sudden you are stealing billions from customers to stave off this one terrible, Rocco's basilisk. You know that one too?
Yeah.
Staving off these terrible, minute possibilities because they just loom wildly and inappropriately large in your brain because you have a weird brain.
Okay, but I want to go back to the first point you said, like make a lot of money. Good. What about the means through which you make a lot of money? I mean, obviously this was one of the problems with SBF, right? It seemed that he had very little regard for how he was making that money. And the reason I'm asking you about this, I don't want to go, and I'm not going to go on another diatribe, but I do wonder if there is kind of a flavor of this in a lot of crypto, and it may not take on the full effective altruism, standpoint, but I do wonder if there's this kind of notion that this also ties in a little bit to your third point, which is like there's this potential dystopian future. And so we have to build these robust systems that are, permissionless and decentralized to stave off this, dystopian future. And I get this vibe. It's nothing more than a vibe. It's like an intuition I get that a lot of times it seems there's kind of an ends justifying the means with a lot of how I think crypto people talk about crypto, and that, how we get there is less important than the fact that we're going to get there, even though sometimes getting there can have very bad effects on the people who engage with these systems. And then obviously SBF is like one of the most extreme examples. What do you think then about the way you make money, even if you intend to give it away? Like what is justified in terms of, creating wealth in order to make the world a better place?
You're putting your finger on an important fault line in ethics, normative ethics, which is just the broad investigation of what is right and wrong. And this is just the divide between consequentialists and non-consequentialists. Consequentialists think that the consequences of actions determine the rightness of actions.
Yes.
And broadly speaking, if the consequences are better than not, or better than the alternatives, then that's the thing you should do. Non-consequentialists disagree and think that there are other constraints on action. For example, there are rights or there are wrongs that are absolutely wrong no matter what. So no matter how much pleasure you could create by torturing someone, you still shouldn't torture them. That might be a kind of absolute constraint. Now, actually, so this is one way of thinking about the problem here, is that it's a kind of consequentialism that has authorized EA to do its dirty business, and that an analog of that is also effect elsewhere in crypto. Now, actually, consequentialists have tools to stave off this objection, though, because they could point to higher order consequences or to the consequences of patterns of behavior. So even if some particular one action has good consequences, they might still say, well, that has higher order consequences because of the kinds of behavior it inspires in others, or the kind of character it creates in yourself and the dispositions to act in the future, or they are acting on a rule, which, though this one little exception case has good consequences, in general is actually quite bad when acted on, if the rule is just make a lot of money. So superficially, I should say, it looks like it's a question of consequentialism and its rivals here, but maybe it's not actually that. And then I think we could actually set aside a lot of philosophy and turn instead to psychology and maybe peer into our own brains and our own hearts and wonder, okay, is this cope? Is this excuse making? Is this rationalization or not? And that's not something that two guys in a podcast can do for someone. But I think when someone hears those questions, the ones for whom it is rationalization, they know who they are. And, what they do with that is on them. But I suspect that is true for many of us, that yes, when we appeal to the consequences of actions to do something weird, this is rationalization. We know it's wrong. We just wanted to do it anyways.
Do you think that, we can end on this, but do you think that crypto is maturing? I say crypto, I mean, maybe once again, your observation of crypto. Do you think it's maturing and seeing maybe this sentiment that SBF put forth in the most extreme case, but with maybe maybe there was some like vibe throughout that there was a lot of these kind of token launches and pump and dumps, but maybe they created something of value, whether it was like commensurate to the amount of money put into it. It's unclear, but I guess not.
Well, people who've been around for a while tend to, and I respect it when they do, start to have doubts about that. And I'll give an example that you might laugh and that many have absolutely laughed at before. What's his name? David Hoffman, one of the Bankless guys.
Yeah.
Weeping as he thinks about the possibility that all of this was for naught. Now, that was performance. That's weird. Many laughed at that. Okay, I laughed too when I saw those clips. And yet, I don't think that's totally crazy that if you've been around for 5, 8, 10 years, you've been working on this stuff, you've been investing in it, you say you're building for a better world. And is there strong, empirical, testable evidence that a better world is being achieved by building these tools? Well, in many cases, no. In many cases, it looks like the world was made worse by some of these tools. So I don't think it's crazy to weep on a podcast when you realize that.
I don't.
And if you don't at least feel something of that, then either you haven't been around for very long, or maybe you're not very honest with yourself. Does that address the vibe that you're trying to point to?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think.
Did you laugh when David cried? Or was it Ryan? I forget. It was David,
it
right?
was it was David. I don't. No, I wasn't laughing. I wasn't laughing. I was thinking
did.
about that.
That makes me bad.
I did. No. There was one.
I'm trying to give credit where it's due right now.
Right. There was one funny part where like an ad popped up.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
I remember this.
I mean, I don't really fault anybody in this industry. I need to think of how to say this. This is like an insane wealth creation phenomena. Like it is, everybody in crypto has had the ability to maximize their own utility. Like going and a lot of times I just think that's what people are doing. And I've brought this up a lot. I talk to these really, really brilliant kids, like out of MIT, out of Stanford, and they're working in crypto, and they may have ambitions to make the world a better place, and they may think that what they're doing is virtuous and noble, and maybe it is. I'm really not making, actually, you're going to just have to trust me on this, and I'm not really making a statement as to whether or not that's the case, but like, it doesn't really matter that much almost in the end, because they're getting funded at the tune of, they're getting startups that are immediately being valued at $100 million. And as long as they kind of do what they say they're going to do, it's almost like a secondary thought. Like these are like little mechanism designers. They find a little solution to a problem, and if they can solve a solution, if they can find a solution in crypto, right, whether or not it has like a measurable impact on the flourishing of humanity, it doesn't like matter that much. They're just solving a little problem, and they happen to be able to make a ton of money doing it. And so I do think there's a large cohort of people in crypto that they're not thinking so hard about that. They're thinking about mechanism design. I don't know. I guess I don't know if that even was that relevant to what you were saying, but I guess I don't know. There's a lot of outside, like, okay, how much of the financial system has been disintermediated as a function of the application I built? Okay, probably near zero, but like, who cares? You kind of just have to accept that almost, I think.
I agree.
Yeah. And
another good diatribe, dude.
Well, no, I mean, I guess the reason I say that is because there's some things I think that if you want, like, I'm generally optimistic about this space, but I don't remember when
optimistic as in market cap will increase. What does this mean?
No. It goes back to a point I made earlier that like maybe just the platonic ideal of permissionless innovation is good enough. Because if I had to pinpoint any specific application or tool, I don't know that I would say that this is a 0-to-1 unlock. I'm talking about like in crypto as a whole, right? Like a lot of the trading mechanisms and lending protocols and like all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But like maybe just the idea that, for example, the sponsor of my podcast is it's a decentralized order book. Two brilliant kids, truly. And I'm would say this regardless of whether or not they sponsor me. I'm homies with these kids, and I can tell they're absolutely brilliant. They worked at Citadel. They would never, ever have been able to create a decentralized NASDAQ if it weren't for the ability to build atop a decentralized protocol. Now, are they going to disintermediate NASDAQ? I don't know. But the ability to do that, maybe something interesting comes out of all this, right? Have we seen it yet? I'm not sure. But I think that's like, you kind of just have to accept that may be the value proposition, that people can just hack away at shit. That could just be it. And what comes out of it, I don't know. I think Anatoly from Solana takes his view, and I generally agree with him, that it's just accelerationism, and being able to build is maybe just enough. Does it justify all the money? I don't know. But it could just be enough. What do you think?
Well, when I hear a speech like that, I think, maybe, but maybe not. And that makes me actually feel more confident to only hold Bitcoin, because I have little doubt about Bitcoin's utility, both in its core function and why somebody might, in a more speculative way, buy atop that as well.
I totally agree.
Maybe not. But the maybe not feels a little bit stronger to me the more time passes without definitive examples of someone successfully making good on this infinite garden promise, and not just planting a seed, but actually growing some fruit from it.
Well, that's powerful, and we can end there, but I would just say one other thing. You're spot on, and I completely agree. It's like we can always be early if you're trying to show somebody something, you know? And the reality is that, like, crypto didn't come about 3 months ago. Crypto's been around now for, 15 years. It's not like, if something.
Here's one way I think about the age of this is it won't be that long till I'll have students in my classroom for whom Bitcoin predated them. So
Yes.
It is not boomer in some extended sense, but like literally, I have no memory of this. It's always been here. This is so old. It's like the internal combustion engine. It may as well be a phonograph record or an internal combustion engine. It's so old. It's technology that predates me. I simply assumed it. It's not cool.
Yeah.
It no longer gets the benefit of the doubt. I get to evaluate it and decide if I want my world and if I want to use it.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be around to observe. So I guess to be determined, and we can chat in 5 years and see if anything revelatory has come about.
We'll see. Maybe.
All right.
Maybe not.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers.